Hi, everyone. I am Eli from the protocol security team over at Coinbase, and we're here doing another base security session. This one's going to be on phishing and social engineering awareness. And with us today, we have Heidi and Serena from Unit 0x, which is our internal on-chain investigations team. And if you have any question, if anybody needs to know anything about what's happening on chain in the background, um, these are the people to talk to. Um, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to them. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat. And if we have time at the end, we'll get to as many as we can. And Heidi, on to you.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Eli. Can you hear me okay? Is everything all good on sound check?
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah, sounds great to me.
Perfect. So nice to meet you guys. Today we're going to be hosting a session, as Eli said, on phishing and social engineering awareness. So quick intro. My name's Heidi, and I'm joined here today by Serena. And we do on-chain investigations here at Coinbase. And, on-chain investigations encompasses a lot of different things. That could be looking into very benign phishing tactics, but that can be going all the way up to investigating, DPRK into how they're laundering funds from recent exchange hacks. So our role here every day, it's different. Every day there's something new. We're constantly trying to stay on the edge of things, of what is up and coming. And so hopefully today will give you a good kind of like peek into our lives here at the company. So we're talking about social engineering and phishing awareness. I want to make it very clear from the get-go that most anti-phishing trainings, such as these, just they don't work. As much as we're going to try to cover as many different case studies today of like what to look out for, quite frankly, social engineers and phishers, they are going to be constantly evolving their tactics. So this presentation might already be out of date, even today. It's just one thing to keep in mind, always just be aware. So over $1.7 billion in crypto was stolen this year due to phishing and social engineering alone. And honestly, this figure is conservative at best. We know that some attributable attacks this year stem from, for example, Bybit, that lost 1.5 billion. We'll talk about that in detail about how that happened. But there are various different other exploits, such as just generally private key theft and wallet drainers that also contribute to this mass number. But why is phishing such a problem within crypto? The way we kind of see it is it's split out into like there are sort of four quadrants here. One is there are low barriers of entry of getting into crypto, and also getting into projects, potentially socially engineering your way into becoming a developer on a project team. There's also very high rewards, right? You could potentially steal a lot from a project. You can potentially steal a lot from like a poor victim user. And then, of course, the third leg is the blockchain speed and permanence of it. So once the funds are out of a victim's wallet, they're gone. Like there's no way that you can reverse that transaction. And that's pretty enticing for an attacker. And last but certainly not least, I really want to call out user blind faith in blockchain security that may or may not already exist, and security bugs and bugs that are actually features, so to speak. And what do I mean by that? So there's a lot of blind faith that when you're sending funds on chain and you think you're sending to the right address and you click send, and nothing looks weird in any of sort of the input data, that you're doing the right thing and everything's fine, right? You just trust it inherently. That's not always the case, right? What's also not always the case is like, oh, well, we want to like, oh, I just signed a message. It's no big deal. I just, uh, signed here that I was going to interact potentially with this sketchy bridge. No big deal. No, that's actually a problem because you probably signed away, access to certain ERC20 tokens and boom, they're gone, right? And so stuff like permit, right, a function that's used quite often, right, especially with bridges, is fantastic, but it's a feature and also a bug that then social engineers or phishers actually like to exploit. So that's what we're getting at here. And this is a very big area that I really want to call out that is it's a pretty big issue within crypto. And some of it might be just the technical expertise that's required to actually verify and check that indeed the transaction that you're making or the message that you're signing is the one you want to actually be signing and you're fully aware of what exactly you're doing. So phishers will target you in a combination of ways, and this is like not supposed to be a laundry list, but these are some pretty big call outs of how they'll try targeting you. They'll try spear phishing you. So that's sort of a targeted attack going directly for you. For example, if they know if you have, for example, on your X handle your ENS address, which many of us have, right? Or if you have an NFT, like they might try to target you through social media, they might target you through your Telegram, they might do all sorts of things because they actually know your wallet balance based on your ENS. Supply chain attacks is another huge one, where what these attackers will do, and we'll see in some case studies, is they'll compromise a third-party service, such as Safe, right? And that are commonly actually used by projects, right? And that compromise then leads to the compromise of several different projects. We've seen this time and time again. Next, obviously, there's malware and device compromise. So when a lot of people think about, getting hacked, immediately they think about things like malware or device compromise. So that's like using some sort of remote access tool to gain access, obviously, to a user's environment. More recently, what we've been seeing is a lot of malware. It can be like something like an info stealer, which we don't cover in detail in this presentation, where they try to just steal all of your wallet logs, and try to find all of your private keys and seed phrases you might have on your laptop. But it could also be malware via contagious interviews that's downloaded, or files that are downloaded that appear benign but actually include malware. And then last but certainly not least, phishers often will, in combination with these other tactics, will invoke social engineering. So where they try to convince you or manipulate you into compromising yourself, or potentially even, getting hired on a project, as we will see in a couple of slides from now. So now that we've gone over kind of like what these combos are and what the combos are that we're going to probably talk about in our case studies, let's get into some case studies. And I know I've got a slew of them here, and we're going to walk through them pretty quickly. So if you guys have questions about details about any of them, we can go into the details. But the point is to kind of make you guys aware of like all of the different ways in which projects have compromised themselves in the past. And so we're going to actually start from the most recent big cases and work our way back from there. So, of course, most of you guys know CoinDCX, an Indian crypto exchange, was hacked back last month, a few weeks ago. They had 44 million stolen from their hot wallets. Now, how did this exactly happen? Like, what was the root cause? The root cause was apparently the DevOps dev was moonlighting on 3 to 4 projects and had their credentials compromised. I note here 3 to 4 projects that you're moonlighting on is a lot, and that's definitely a red flag that we may or may not talk about a little bit later, but I'm happy to cover that. But oftentimes when I see 3 to 4 projects being worked on at once by one particular person, that screams you may or may not have an issue. Next, of course, we all know it already, and I won't harp on Bybit, but everyone knows about the Bybit hack that happened in February, where $1.5 billion was stolen. And the way this happened was through a combination of malware and obviously a supply chain attack. We all know that somehow their safe instance was compromised, and so therefore the signer signed off on a transaction that in reality wasn't actually performed. Now, how did it actually start though? It started out by a Safe developer accessing a semi-benign looking page of get stock price. And this then ultimately installed malware and then led to attackers, DPRK in this particular case, being able to basically take over specifically the Bybit safe so that they were able to then manipulate it so that they could perform their attack. Now, one thing I have listed here, which is the culprit, which is Trader. This is a subset of DPRK, so we'll talk a bit about those throughout sort of these case studies. But that's one thing to also think about is supply chain attacks here. Next, of course, you guys might have heard the noise about Nick Franklin. Now, Nick Franklin was an active Ethereum security researcher in the space up through March of 2025, when he ultimately was called out by 1inch for having sent over a malicious file of a compromised 1inch. And so this malware was then reverse engineered and analyzed, and sure enough, it was related to citrine sleet, aka apple juice. And you don't have to know what in the world that is, but basically it's another subset of DPRK malware. And so what this guy basically did was that he acted as a security researcher helping out various different projects. And so in total, it is believed that he might have stolen upwards of $50 million plus. In fact, one area where Nick Franklin actually shows up is with Radiant Capital, interestingly enough. So you guys might know Radiant Capital was actually hacked twice last year. Once in January and the other time in October. In October, it had about 53 million stolen. Again, it was citrine sweet apple juice. And the way that the protocol got compromised in this instance was a dev got contacted by a person who was posing as a former contractor via Telegram. And of course, they were sent a seemingly benign PDF. Hopefully, you're catching my drift with some of this stuff. But if you actually look at the Radiant Capital previously, you'll actually note, and I think there are some security researchers who have published this on X, is that our friend Nick Franklin back here was involved in one of the multi-sigs that was being used to test back in the day for the protocol. So I'll leave you guys with that like little nugget, and we'll go move on to the next case study. The next case study here we've got Tapioca DAO. Now this happened also in October of 2024. They had about almost $5 million stolen. And in this case, what I really want to call out is the co-founder was tricked into downloading malware via a contagious interview. Contagious interviews are rampant. And what they are is basically the project might set up a meeting with a potential VC, or the VC might send them a meeting link, whatever have you, or it might be also just like the project wanting to hire like a dev. Anyways, regardless, the attacker will send the meeting link gets opened, and you think you're using Zoom or whatever have you, and boom, you've already installed malware by like accessing the page effectively. And so the issue with this is that like it's very, very rampant. And of course, here in this case, it led to this particular. Next, I want to cover Trueflation, and this is actually the final case study. And Trueflation also happened around October of 2024. About $5 billion was stolen. And in this case, $5 billion was stolen mainly, if I recall correctly, from the CEO's personal wallets. Now, this was done via social engineering and what we believe is probably malware. And what's interesting, and you guys can read a whole bunch of different reports from the CEO, he was very transparent about everything that went down. So there's like a lot of good news articles on this, but he literally just hired good devs. He thought they were great devs. Turns out probably was DPRK. So again, hiring a good dev might actually be a red flag in some cases, but it's obviously, you got to couple together a couple other features. So the takeaway for you, I rambled down a whole bunch of different case studies, a whole bunch of different like threat vectors that you probably are now paranoid about. But the main takeaway is that attackers are going to try a host of means to get to you in order to get access to either your project or your wallet. But ultimately, they want to gain access to your funds, right? And it only takes one person to be compromised. I want to call that out again. It only takes one person to be compromised. And this is really important when you think about a large project, because then, that's quite scary, right? With Safe, for example, it just involved one developer getting compromised. So that's one thing to call out, that ultimately led to the 1.5 billion stolen earlier this year. So I'm going to actually transfer this presentation over to Serena, who's going to be giving sort of some takeaways for you as to what you kind of should be thinking about, like going forward and how to protect yourself better. So Serena, if you want to take the stage.
Hello. My name's Serena. I work in the trust and safety team at Coinbase. We kind of focus more on consumer safety. And so basically, I'm just going to talk, give a few slides about how you as the user can protect yourself, within a Web3 ecosystem. So obviously, we've always got to kind of assume that someone's trying to trick you, is the first thing. So how do we protect ourselves from that? Okay, so bookmark frequently visited dApps. Make sure you're using a unique email address for Web3 services. Don't trust and verify. And if it's urgent, it's probably a scam. I think we all get kind of anxious when we're claiming, new token airdrops or whatever. We've always got to kind of keep a level head and make sure that we know exactly what site we're visiting and what we are signing and permitting. Yeah. Then next, So basically, we obviously want to kind of how are we going to protect ourselves? Okay, so we know we have to be like aware. We know we have to be kind of a bit paranoid about on-chain transactions. So the first obviously is use MFA. So by that we mean multi-factor authentication. So that's things like YubiKey, for example, everywhere that you can. If you're a US based user, this is probably more applicable. You can get Google Fi to protect from SIM swaps. You should always make sure that your device is up to date. So whatever kind of device you're using, whether it's an iPhone, an Android, MacBook, Windows laptop, whatever it is, and always make sure that you're using kind of reputable antivirus software. Sounds quite simple, but obviously switch your devices on and off. And make sure that you kind of, if you are obviously hiring anyone, if you are a developer and you're hiring for your project, you do a significant amount of due diligence into them. Like, there are certain red flags around, people who might potentially be DPRK, like, obviously AI generated resumes or LinkedIn's that are kind of claim that they're experts in everything, as it were. That's obviously not an exhaustive list. Also, kind of consider kind of kill switches, whether that's a kill switch, a smart contract kill switch, whether it's kind of via multi-sig or similar. That's also a great kind of way to protect yourself and protect your project. iPhones obviously do have lockdown mode if you are kind of concerned about a potential breach. So that's obviously something to consider for iPhone users. We also obviously want to keep good browser hygiene. So you can use, if you're on a desktop, obviously, you can use separate containers or browser profiles, and also keep browser extensions to a minimum. Obviously, we get a lot of malicious browser extensions that end up staying on various Play stores, etc., that are downloaded before we realise obviously what's actually within these browser extensions. So similarly, kind of ties into the next point really of being very wary of software downloads. So, that goes for anything. It goes for a browser extension. It goes for, perhaps if someone reaches out to you and they've got a new opportunity for you and they ask you for whatever reason to download some kind of a new video conferencing software, that should obviously ring alarm bells in your head. Also, simulate and fact check transactions. Like, what do we do? What will this transaction do? Obviously Heidi talked earlier about the Bybit hack and obviously how that was essentially blind signing that caused that. You need to obviously think about how you're going to simulate transactions so you know what you're going to sign before you sign it. And last but not least on this slide, obviously trust your gut. Does something seem off? Does the site look a bit off? Does the person who's reached out to you on X or Farcaster or whatever, do they seem off? And trust your gut. Don't rush into things. Do your due diligence and just make sure that you're protected. And then so next, we're going to talk about when things go wrong. So obviously, things do go wrong, even if we've taken all those steps. Sometimes things go wrong, and then we have to obviously take steps to address what's happened. So number one, obviously, pause your project. Pause all transactions. Make sure that you revoke sessions and approvals. You can use tools to obviously monitor what's going on chain, and then make sure that you're reporting any kind of phishing attempts or malicious activity to the domain block list and the wider community, because it's obviously that's how we get stronger as a community, is that we all help each other stay safe on chain, which is the main thing. And then I guess that concludes our presentation. We're definitely up for questions from the floor if anyone has them.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. That was great. I've got a couple of questions that are here that I'm gonna just go ahead and ask. First one for Serena on your section. I noticed that you had a section about how you can use Google Fi to protect from SIM swaps. How exactly does that protect you versus using like a different cell phone carrier?
Yeah, so obviously SIM jacking is pretty common for people in the United States. Google Fi is tied, your Google Fi number is tied to your Google account. So any kind of SIM, any service changes like SIM swaps will require you to log into that account. So that's why it's probably the best kind of form of, I guess, protection against SIM swaps. Obviously, I do recognise this is an international forum, and in general, this is something that is more prevalent amongst US-based users. Yeah, that's essentially why. You can also, for example, another thing you can do with Google Fi is that you have a number lock feature as well. So when you do enable it, it kind of prevents any transfer of your phone number to a new device or carrier. So even if someone contacts support saying, whatever the support for your carrier is, saying hi, or I've lost my phone, et cetera, etc. It will then block that from happening until you yourself kind of verify that it's you, for example. So yeah, and you can turn that on via your phone settings, privacy and security, and then number lock when you navigate to fi.google.com. So yes, that's why I'd recommend it. Obviously, it's not a personal, not a Coinbase recommendation, but I think it's a good idea for definitely US-based users where SIM swaps are quite common.
Thank you. Which it's really funny because I gave a presentation at a conference in 2018 about SIM swaps and how to protect yourself from them, and it's crazy that's still an issue that's not solved by all carriers. Um, Here's another one for you, Serena. What tools do you recommend for simulating transactions? Like as an end user, what can they use?
I can also help out with this one too. I think with simulating transactions, you can obviously use things like Tenderly. I mean, none of this is like, Coinbase stamp of approval here. This is just like Heidi's personal thoughts. You can use things like Tenderly. There are lots of different tools similar to Tenderly out there. There are also free tools as well that I know have been developed by the Security Alliance as well, that you might want to use for transaction simulation. I know that some wallets are actually trying to work to better kind of like parse out exactly what's going on in a transaction, to better alert a user of anything sketchy kind of happening. One thing I want to call out also too is fact checking your transactions. So don't just simulate, but also fact check whether or not the hashes are matching up, etc. So it can be as simple as something like that. Like literally when you're signing a transaction, make sure that what you see on your screen actually matches like what you're, seeing in your ledger. It could be as dumb as that. So yeah, hopefully that helps. I don't know,
That's
Serena.
wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's see. Let's do another. Oh, yes. Go ahead.
That's absolutely fine. Thanks.
Okay. Let's see. Let's do another one. How are phishing attacks evolving as more users are moving to like mobile first wallets and hardware devices instead of their desktop computers?
Yeah, so this one's a kind of crazy question because we mainly for this presentation wanted to concentrate on like the very high ticket value compromises that we've seen in the past year to really alert devs, right? But what we didn't really cover was things like wallet drainers or what I was talking about as an aside, like info stealers too. There's also other benign phishing techniques that I expect to see a lot more of besides just your general rote impersonation like exercises, right? Um, of variations of address poisoning. And I really want to call that address poisoning because this stuff evolves so fast. And I cheated a little bit here and had these in the appendix because I thought we might want to cover stuff like this. But what exactly is address poisoning? Address poisoning is where an attacker will pretend to make it look like you either sent or received from an address that you've previously interacted with, right? Yet that address, it might match, like the first couple of characters of that address might match the last couple of characters, right? But in reality, that address is literally just a spoof address, right? It's not actually the one that you indeed to send to. And this is accomplished by a lot of different tools that exist out there. You can read up on those in your free time. But vanity addresses are pretty popular, right? It's very easy to actually create one of these addresses if you have enough computing power. But as you can see here in this transaction, or sorry, this screenshot of this wallet that where transactions like we started seeing this, by the way, a lot in the end of 2022, this like address poisoning sort of start to rise up. Where you see here on the third row, you see a send that happens January 18th to the 0x5ECF address. And you see that one USDC was sent, right? I'm guessing transaction fees are really high because why was 573 actually sent in the end? But like that's a whole separate question for another day. But if you see then right above it, you see another send happening, but you see the USDC value is 0, right? Yet 287 was sent. What in the world happened here, right? That was probably the gas fee, right? This was a address poisoner who made it seem like the user was indeed transferring the actual real USDC from the like victim's quote unquote address to their destination address, when in reality that destination address was a spoof address. Now, block explorers, people such as ourselves, we wised up to this pretty fast, right? And they were like, oh, this is really easy. They're transferring 0 USDC. We know how to like get rid of this. Like we just, filter out these spam transactions. No, these guys then escalated. They were like, no, you know what? I'm going to actually just launch a fake USDC and see if I can get around that, because like all of these different wallets that exist out there, they're not going to be able to handle all of our inundations. Right. And sure enough, we can see that here, this happened with the Euler exploiter. This was like a little bit later in 2023, like what was it, maybe March or April. Like you can see this legit transaction of DAI being sent, but then the spoofer literally like a block or two later sends out a very similar transaction, literally mimicking it. Right. And it looks like indeed the Euler exploiter indeed sent that 10 million some odd DAI to that spoof address. The hope is that you're accidentally going to copy paste that spoof address, right? That's the whole deal with this thing. And the problem is that people actually do just copy paste. And so that's why it's really useful to have things like address lists where you can actually save, an address you've previously sent to without falling victim. It's nice because tools like EtherScan, SoulScan as well, they're starting to filter out this noise, but we're going to continue seeing new iterations of this. We're already seeing iterations of similar activity using things like base names too to impersonate, right? This is basically like the on-chain version of impersonations. So yeah, hopefully like that's like a long-winded, answer to your question. I'm sorry, Eli, but like this is an area that I think, people kind of need to wise up to a little bit as well, that we're always seeing new developments here.
Yeah, and another interesting thing that I notice on a lot of these spoofing addresses, uh, the way that Ethereum addresses are formatted, um, there's a code in how they capitalize or lowercase the letters. So that's another thing that can like really, even if you notice like, oh, sometimes the E is capitalized and it's not capitalized. If you see that, that's a red flag. Um,
Yeah, but it kind of goes back to the issue of like user dev blind faith, right? Because like this is something that you need to be really aware of. And I'll be honest with you guys, like when I was testing, like when I was trying to explain this to some people, I was like, you know what? You're not fully understanding this. Let me actually generate up a vanity address to prove to you what the problem is here. And the problem is people fall for it. Even people knowing of this scam will fall for it by accident because they're not aware of like, oh, it's capitalized here, it's not. The other thing too with the various tools that I was talking about, it you just have to change a couple of parameters to make sure that you get the proper capitalization. You just got to hash through a little bit more. So yeah.
yeah, such an interesting type of tech. And thanks for like adding this appendix. Just it's like you knew I was going to ask a question about it. Um, and I think that we hit time. So thank you both so much for doing this presentation for the security session for us. Um, I think we just leave the call now. So um, thank you also everyone for joining and watching this afterwards. Yeah, have a great one.
Thanks so much. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.